Why are you serving that filthy old man? He looks like he crawled out of a dumpster. Clara Jensen didn't hesitate. She placed a plate of warm meatloaf in front of the man, added a muffin, and smiled. Because dignity, she said quietly, isn't something you earn with a paycheck. Hours later, that quiet act of defiance would shake the sky itself. The ground shook, dishes rattled, and a Black Hawk helicopter landed just behind her tiny diner. A general stepped out, not to arrest anyone, but to thank the waitress who gave an old man a free meal. No one knew he was a decorated war hero. No one, until that night. And what he said next left the whole town speechless. Flagstaff, Arizona. A quiet desert town tucked between pine forests and forgotten highways. It's the kind of place where you can still hear gravel crunch beneath truck tires, where the wind carries the smell of old wood, and where stories gather in the corners of diners more than they do in newspapers. Clara Jensen had never planned to run a diner, but after her father, Korean War veteran and lifelong mechanic, passed, she couldn't bring herself to sell the old place. So at 28, Clara became the sole owner of Jensen's, a small roadside diner with red vinyl booths, a flickering neon sign, and the kind of coffee that never quite cools. She ran it with quiet purpose. No corporate polish, no laminated menus. Just her, a chalkboard of daily specials, and a deep belief that everyone deserved to be treated like they mattered. Something her father taught her before the war took pieces of him no one could see. For months, Clara had noticed a man across the road. He sat on a bench outside the old post office, same time each day, wearing a faded olive jacket and a cap pulled low. He never came inside, never spoke, just watched. His name was Walter Graham, though Clara didn't know that yet, and he'd spent most of the past 10 years trying not to be noticed. But that day he came in. The bell above the door jingled softly as he entered. Conversation inside the diner lulled, then resumed. He moved slowly, each step cautious, as if unsure he was welcome. He took a seat near the corner, tucked against the wall. He didn't ask for much, just a glass of water. Clara brought it herself, placed it gently on the table, and gave a small smile. No questions, no pressure, but not everyone shared her sense of decency. At the center table sat a man in a crisp shirt, expensive watch gleaming on his wrist, clearly from out of town, maybe passing through on business. He watched Walter with obvious disdain, lips curling in disapproval. "Why are you serving that filthy old man?" the man muttered loudly enough for others to hear. "He looks like he crawled out of a dumpster." Clara froze. The words sliced through the room like ice. A few customers looked up. No one said anything. But Clara did. She turned, walked into the kitchen, and returned with a plate. Meatloaf, mashed potatoes, and a muffin warm from the oven. She placed it in front of Walter as if he were royalty. "It's on the house," she said softly. The businessman scoffed. "What is this? A charity kitchen? Some of us actually work for a living." Clara didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "Because dignity," she replied, "isn't something you earn with a paycheck." He left in a storm of mockery, slapping bills on the table. His companions looked embarrassed. One even left a large tip behind. Walter, stunned, looked down at the food. His hands trembled slightly. "You didn't have to do that," he whispered. "I know how I look." Clara met his eyes. Everyone deserves a warm meal and a little respect. Walter didn't eat all of it. He wrapped the muffin in a napkin and tucked it away carefully. Before leaving, he placed a single quarter on the table. Maybe all he had. Clara picked it up quietly, holding it in her palm like something sacred. She didn't know why, but she kept it. What she also didn't know, what no one in that diner knew, was that behind the frayed jacket and lowered gaze was a war hero. And by nightfall, the sky above her diner would tremble in his honor. Walt Graham didn't sleep well that night. He never did, not for decades. Not since the jungles of Vietnam. Not since the day the rotor gave out on the CH-47 he was patching together with scavenged parts and prayer. Even now at 85, sleep came in fits and flashes, memories flickering like projector reels no one else could see. He awoke in his one-bedroom apartment, tucked above a shuttered print shop on East Walnut. The ceiling fan clicked with every rotation. The same coffee can sat on the windowsill, holding quarters for laundry. His morning ritual was slow: boiling water, oatmeal with too much cinnamon, a few arthritic stretches that never quite loosened his knees. But that morning, there was something different. Not outside, not in the world. Inside, someone had seen him, not for what he lacked, but for what he carried. That kindness from the diner hadn't been expected. He certainly hadn't asked for it. In fact, Walt had spent most of his life avoiding attention. He had learned to keep quiet, especially when the world moved too fast to remember anything older than a tweet or a headline. But beneath that faded olive jacket was a story no one ever asked to hear. And even if they had, he wouldn't have known how to tell it. Walt Graham was born in 1938, just before the war swept the world. By the time he was 7, his father had gone off to fight in Europe and never came home. His mother raised him and his 2 sisters with a firm hand and a firmer belief that men should earn respect, not demand it. When Walt turned 19, he enlisted in the U.S. Air Force. Not for adventure, not even for patriotism. It was for structure, for the chance to work on machines he'd only seen in Popular Mechanics. Planes made sense. People didn't. He showed a knack for maintenance almost immediately. The older crew chiefs began calling him the Whisperer, claiming he could diagnose an engine problem just by listening to its hum from 30 feet away. When the Vietnam War escalated, Walt was deployed to a base outside Pleiku, deep in the Central Highlands. He served 3 tours, not as a pilot, not as a commander, just a mechanic, just a ghost in coveralls with a grease pencil behind his ear and lungs full of jet fuel. But the stories people never heard weren't about what Walt fixed. They were about what he risked. In the summer of 1969, a Chinook helicopter came in heavy, damaged hydraulics, bad crosswind, tail rotor failure. It skidded on landing and exploded into flames. Most men ran. Walt didn't. He ran the other way, straight into fire. He pulled out 9 crewmen, one by one. His arms were scorched. He collapsed after the last soldier was dragged to safety. For that act, Walt was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross, one of the highest non-combat honors in the U.S. Air Force. He didn't attend the ceremony. "Those boys flew into fire," he told his commanding officer. "I just fixed the birds." After Vietnam, Walt continued serving, training young airmen, writing repair protocols that would eventually become part of official doctrine. He turned down promotions, never married, and always said the same thing when asked why. "I'm already married to those birds." In 1984, he retired with 26 years of service and moved to Arizona. He opened a small repair shop, fixed old Buicks and busted microwaves, taught neighborhood kids how to change oil and patch flat tires. Never charged single moms or veterans a dime if he could help it. But the years weren't kind. Agent Orange exposure, arthritis, then Parkinson's. The slow unraveling of hands that had once rebuilt turbine engines in the dark by feel alone. The shop closed. The pension barely covered rent. Friends died or drifted, and Walt became what so many veterans become: invisible. He still wore his old jacket. Not because he clung to the past, but because it was warm, and the pockets were deep, and the lining reminded him of the base hangar at Da Nang. That's what Clara saw. Not a vagrant, but a man wrapped in decades of service and silence. She hadn't asked his name that day, but somehow she knew. Back in the diner, that plate of meatloaf still lingered in his mind. Not for the taste, not for the muffin, but for what it meant. For the first time in years, someone had looked him in the eyes without judgment or pity. Just simple respect, the kind no medal could give, the kind no paycheck could buy. That night, for reasons he didn't fully understand, Walt dug into an old tin in his closet. Inside were pieces of his life folded neatly into envelopes, discharge papers, a faded photo of his unit, and a rusted piece of metal, half of the Distinguished Flying Cross pin that had broken in a move years ago. He made a call, not to the VA, not to a hotline, to an old friend, a name he hadn't dialed in over 30 years, Major General Marcus Lang, the son of a pilot Walt had once carried out of a burning chopper. And what Walt said to him wasn't dramatic, just 8 words. "Someone was kind to me today, that's all." By 8:45 p.m., Clara was alone in the diner. The dinner rush had come and gone. The red booths were empty. The lights dimmed just slightly, and the radio hummed a low tune from a distant decade. Clara wiped down the counters, her body tired but her mind unsettled. Something about that man, Walt, lingered. His quiet thank you, the way he tucked part of the sandwich into his pocket like it was a treasure. The single quarter he left behind now rested in the tip jar, not as money, but as a symbol. She didn't know why she couldn't bring herself to leave it out. Then the noise came. At first it was low, a distant hum that could have been a freight train or passing thunder. Clara barely looked up, but it grew louder, stronger. The windows began to rattle in their frames. Plates on the drying rack trembled. The overhead lights flickered. She stepped outside, dish towel still in hand. What she saw made her heart stop. A Black Hawk helicopter, sleek, powerful, military grade, descended behind the diner, its rotors kicking up a storm of gravel and dust across the empty lot. The sky churned with artificial wind. Napkins flew from the tables inside. The back door slammed shut on its own. Clara shielded her eyes with her arm, blinking through the whirlwind. She thought, this must be a mistake. Maybe a medevac. Maybe an emergency. But the helicopter didn't fly past. It landed. As the rotors slowed, the side door slid open. Two soldiers in fatigue stepped out first, scanning the surroundings with calm precision. Then, from the heart of the machine, emerged a tall man in formal dress uniform. His chest bore rows of medals, his shoulders squared beneath the stars of a brigadier general. He walked straight toward her. "Miss Jensen?" he called over the still whirring blades. Clara nodded, frozen, unsure if she was in trouble or dreaming. "I apologize for the unannounced landing," the man said, stopping just a few feet from her. "But when a man like Walt Graham tells you someone showed him kindness, you don't wait until morning." She blinked. "Wait. What?" The general's tone softened, the military cadence giving way to something more human. "In 1969, Walt Graham pulled my father out of a burning helicopter. Saved his life. My father never forgot it. Neither did I." Wykin, the general reached into his coat and pulled out a small envelope. "Walt called me tonight, just to say that someone treated him decently for the first time in years. He didn't ask for anything, didn't want attention, but some debts can't be ignored." Behind the general, Clara noticed another vehicle approaching, a military Humvee, flanked by a local police cruiser whose lights stayed respectfully dim. And then, stepping out from the passenger side of the Humvee, Walt Graham. But not the Walt she'd seen that afternoon. This Walt stood straighter, his eyes clearer. He wore his formal Air Force dress uniform, pressed and adorned with polished metals that shimmered under the diner's neon glow. The faded jacket was gone. The man in front of her now looked like someone who had stared down storms and survived. Clara covered her mouth, her breath catching. Walt didn't speak at first. He just walked slowly to the corner booth, the same one where he'd sat quietly just hours earlier, and placed his hand on the tabletop. It was a small gesture, but it was everything. The general turned to face the small gathering crowd. Neighbors who had stepped out in robes and slippers, kids still clutching phones, a local news van just pulling up at the edge of the lot. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "it is my honor to recognize Technical Sergeant Walter Graham, United States Air Force, recipient of the Distinguished Flying Cross and the Bronze Star, a man whose hands once rebuilt flight and whose silence hid heroism." Applause broke out, then salutes, then tears. Clara stood still, overwhelmed. "Miss Jensen," the general added, turning back to her, "you reminded us what respect looks like in action, not words. And on behalf of every uniform Walt ever helped send safely home, thank you." One of the soldiers stepped forward, presenting Clara with a letter, embossed with seals and signed by multiple officers. A formal commendation. She didn't know what to say. Walt finally spoke, voice raspy but sure. "Told them not to make a fuss," he said, managing a smile. "Soldiers never were good at following orders from mechanics." Laughter rippled through the crowd. And in that moment, beneath the desert sky and the rumble of rotor blades, the ground didn't just shake from engines, it trembled from something deeper, a community remembering what it had almost forgotten. Walt stood beneath the glow of the diner's flickering sign, shoulders square, though time had stolen the fullness of his frame. The moment should have embarrassed him. He hated fuss, avoided cameras like sickness. But tonight, he stood still, letting it all happen. He was being seen, truly seen. And maybe just this once, that was okay. The crowd grew as word spread. Some came in their nightclothes rubbing sleep from their eyes. Others arrived straight from work, still in uniforms, dusty boots, scrubs, or aprons. A few local veterans recognized the distinguished flying cross pinned to Walt's coat and straightened themselves reflexively, offering crisp practice salutes. Walt returned each one with humble dignity. Clara Jensen stood beside him, still holding the letter of commendation the general had handed her. She hadn't read it yet. Her fingers trembled slightly, not out of fear or confusion, but from the weight of it all. A man she'd offered a sandwich to was now surrounded by officers, veterans, townspeople, and the steady hum of a Black Hawk helicopter parked just beyond the gravel lot. It was surreal. General Lang stepped forward again, now with a softer demeanor. He wasn't here as a commander now, but as a son. "My father spoke about Walter Graham the way people speak about legends," he said, addressing the crowd. "But Walt never wanted credit, said he just fixed things. Well, he fixed my father's fate, and in doing so, mine too." He turned to Walt. "Sir, this is overdue. We can't change the years you were forgotten, but we can make sure this night is remembered." Another round of applause followed. Someone had brought out an American flag. A couple of high school students, neighbors who lived just down the street, began streaming the event on social media. That video, uploaded under the hashtag #RememberWalt, would rack up 1.4 million views by the next morning. Back inside the diner, Clara poured coffee for a few of the officers and neighbors. No one paid for anything. She wouldn't have let them if they tried. The plates came out hot and fast, hands moving automatically as her mind tried to catch up. Walt had returned to his booth, but this time he wasn't alone. One by one, people came and sat beside him, some just to shake his hand, others to leave notes or tokens of appreciation. A young boy gave him a baseball card. An older woman handed him a photo of her late husband, who'd served in Da Nang. Walt held it for a long moment. "We were probably on the same airstrip," he said softly. "Different jobs, same son." General Lang approached Clara again, this time with less ceremony. "May I ask how you knew?" Clara shook her head. "I didn't," she said. "Not really. I just saw someone who looked like he could use a meal." He smiled. "That's all it takes sometimes." The general gave her a final nod, then turned to leave. The helicopter would lift off soon. But before he reached the door, Clara called out, "General!" He turned. "How did he reach you so fast?" The general chuckled. "He called my father. First time in 20 years. Told him someone had treated him with respect today. My father cried. Then he called me. Said it was time someone returned the favor." Clara didn't know what to say, so she simply nodded. As the Black Hawk's engines powered back up, the town stood in collective silence. No music, no fanfare. Just the weight of memory and the thrum of blades against the dark sky. In the days that followed, the story spread. Local news stations replayed the footage hourly. National outlets picked it up. "A meal for a hero," one headline read. $8 and a muffin that moved the military, said another. Veterans groups around the country began sharing their own stories of forgotten service and unseen wounds. Clara's Diner became a quiet symbol, not just of kindness, but of recognition. The kind that rarely came wrapped in ceremony or stripes. The kind that came in eye contact, warmth, dignity. Clara placed Walt's quarter, the one he'd left after his first meal, inside a small shadow box on the diner wall, next to a printed copy of the commendation letter. Above it, she added a hand-painted wooden sign, "Dignity served here." Walt came in more regularly after that. Still quiet, still humble, but now he had a place, not just a seat, but a presence. When he walked in, conversations didn't stop out of discomfort. They paused out of respect. Clara kept doing what she always did. Coffee, meatloaf, listening without asking too much. But something had shifted. A single act of kindness had echoed farther than she ever imagined. And recognition, long overdue, had finally come home. By the next morning, the video had already reached over 1 million views. Shot from a shaky iPhone, it captured the moment a Black Hawk helicopter touched down behind a humble diner in Flagstaff, Arizona. It showed a general stepping out, not for combat, not for ceremony, but to thank a waitress who gave an old man a warm plate of meatloaf. And then it showed that old man, thin, bent, dressed in a frayed jacket, now standing tall in full Air Force dress uniform, saluting the crowd with the calm dignity of a man who had once faced fire and never asked to be thanked for it. The internet had seen many things, but not this. The clip was raw, real, and it hit something deep in people. By sunrise, the hashtag #OneShotRememberWalt was trending on Twitter, Facebook, and TikTok. Commenters from every state poured in, sharing stories of grandfathers who had served, veterans who were forgotten, and simple acts of kindness that had changed everything. News stations scrambled to cover the story. An $8 meal that stirred the nation, read one headline. The waitress who saluted with a fork, said another. Clara didn't even know what to say when they started calling. She turned down all interviews. I just fed a man who looked hungry, she told the first reporter. I didn't think it would shake the sky. But it had. Donations started flowing in. Small amounts at first, $5, $10, $20, some from people who had never even been to Arizona. Many came with notes. This is for the next Walt who walks through your door. To the man my dad could have been. Thank you for reminding us what honor looks like. With help from a local veterans organization, Clara used the funds to create a formal program, Walt's Table. The idea was simple. One table in the diner would always be open for a veteran. Any veteran. No questions, no bill. Just food, coffee, and respect. A plaque was added beside the booth, reserved in honor of those who served, with quiet courage and open hearts. It wasn't long before the table filled daily. Older men in faded hats, women who had served in logistics or medical units. Some came alone. Some brought photos. Some brought nothing but silence. And Clara made sure each one was met with the same warm smile and the same cup of black coffee she'd once poured for Walt. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, the diner turned into something more than a restaurant. It became a gathering place, a place where veterans swapped stories, helped each other navigate VA paperwork, or just sat in silence with people who understood. Walt, for his part, kept showing up. Not every day, but often enough to be noticed. He'd come in early, read the paper, and stay long after the lunch crowd left. People still asked for photos. Sometimes he obliged. Other times he'd wave them off with a smile and say, I'm just here for the pie. One afternoon, something unexpected happened. The businessman, the same man who had insulted Walt days earlier, walked back into the diner. This time, he didn't come alone. He had his young son with him, no older than 10, wearing a school polo and holding a small American flag. The man approached Clara first. His face was flushed, but his voice steady. I came to say I was wrong. He turned to Walt, who sat in his usual booth with a coffee and slice of lemon pie. Sir, I disrespected you. I didn't know who you were. I didn't know what you'd done, and I'm not proud of what I showed my boy that day. The diner went quiet again. Walt looked at him for a long moment, then at the boy. You didn't have to come, Walt said. I did, the man replied. I want my son to learn that real men admit when they're wrong, and that respect isn't earned by money. Walt extended a hand across the table. They shook, without another word. The boy gave Walt the flag. Walt folded it neatly and placed it beside his quarter on the table. In the following months, Walt's Table inspired other diners and cafes across the state to start similar programs. Some offered discounts to veterans. Others simply posted signs that read, You are seen, you are welcome. The movement wasn't loud. It wasn't backed by corporations or campaigns. It was built, like Clara's original gesture, on something simpler, human decency. And while most people eventually moved on to the next viral story, one quiet corner of Flagstaff continued its quiet revolution. One cup of coffee, one plate of meatloaf, one hand extended across a table at a time. And in that small act of defiance, offering dignity when no one else did, Clara had reminded the world that some ripples never fade. A week after the helicopter landed behind the diner, Clara hung the shadow box on the wall. It wasn't big, just enough to hold a few things that mattered. Walt's broken Distinguished Flying Cross, now carefully repaired and polished, the quarter he'd once left on the table, the small American flag the boy had handed him, and a photograph of him sitting in his booth, smiling faintly with coffee in hand. Above it, in quiet script, a wooden sign read, "Legacy isn't loud." People came in just to see it. Some left notes tucked under the frame. Others left unit patches, challenge coins, or small mementos of their own family service. One child drew a crayon picture of Walt sitting beside a fighter jet, smiling beneath blue sky. Walt never asked for any of it. In truth, it embarrassed him a little. But he came anyway, quietly sliding into his usual booth as if nothing had changed. But something had. Veterans from other towns started stopping by. Some drove hours just to sit at Walt's table. They shared stories over pie and coffee. Some laughed, some cried, some just sat quietly listening. They didn't come for fame or recognition. They came because, for the first time in years, someone had made space for them. Local schools took notice. A high school history teacher reached out to Clara and asked if students could start interviewing veterans at the diner for a class project called Voices We Almost Lost. Clara didn't hesitate. She cleared a small corner near the window, added a few chairs, and left a notepad and recorder in a box labeled "Stories Worth Keeping." Walt was the first to be interviewed. It took some coaxing. He wasn't a man of long sentences, but once he started, it was hard to stop him. He didn't talk about medals. He talked about broken engines, the smell of jet fuel, the names of friends who never came home, and the sound of a wrench clinking onto hangar floors in the middle of the night. "You don't always know the moment that changes you," he said to a nervous teenager with a spiral notebook. "Sometimes you only see it looking back, in a place like this, over a cup of coffee." Clara watched it all unfold with quiet awe. She never planned any of this. She didn't start out trying to change lives. She just followed what her grandfather once told her. Feed people. Look them in the eyes. Let them know they matter. Now she wiped down the same tables, filled the same coffee pots, and listened to the same creak of the door when it opened. But everything felt different, fuller, more sacred somehow. She once told a local reporter, when pressed for a quote, "We never know what battles someone fought before sitting at our table." That line ended up on bumper stickers and eventually on a mural downtown. But Clara didn't say it for the cameras. She said it because it was true. One evening, just before closing, Clara stood behind the counter, wiping a coffee cup. Walt was still in his booth, hands wrapped around a half-full mug. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. The radio hummed softly in the background. A breeze shifted the edge of the napkin dispenser. Outside, the streetlights buzzed as dusk painted long shadows across the sidewalk. It was just another night, but something about it felt complete. Walt took a final sip and placed his mug gently on the table. Clara gave him a quiet nod as she turned off the neon sign. And somewhere, far beyond the walls of that little diner, the world kept spinning, faster, louder, more distracted than ever. But not here. Here, in a corner booth near a coffee-stained counter, dignity had found a home. And now we ask you, would you have done the same? Would you have seen the man behind the jacket? Or would you have walked by? The choice, it turns out, still waits at every table. In today's fast-moving world, it's easy to overlook the quiet ones. We pass by strangers every day, some in worn jackets, some with trembling hands, and rarely stop to ask who they were before life wore them down. But what if behind one of those tired faces was a story like Walt's? A life of service, of sacrifice, of unspoken battles fought so the rest of us could eat in peace. Clara didn't need a headline to act. She didn't need a medal to recognize a human soul. All it took was compassion, a hot meal, a soft word, a moment of dignity. That's the lesson we carry forward. That kindness doesn't require permission. That respect isn't owed to titles, but to truth, humility, and history. So we ask you, have you ever met someone like Walt? Have you ever chosen to look away when maybe you should have leaned in? Share your thoughts in the comments. We want to hear your stories, your moments of grace, regret, or quiet courage. Let this be more than a video. Let it be a conversation across generations. Thank you for joining us for this story. If it moved you, please like, subscribe, and help us share more stories that remind the world what respect really looks like. Because sometimes a cup of coffee carries a legacy.